All right, let's dive right into a scenario with some pretty massive global consequences. We're going to explore a question that honestly keeps a lot of people up at night. What happens when the world's most vital energy artery just snaps shut? Let's get into it.
So, let me ask you this. What if tomorrow morning you woke up and 1/5 of the world's oil supply was just gone, just vanished overnight? Now, that's not some abstract number from a textbook, right? That is literally the lifeblood of our global economy. And you know what? It all hinges on one single, incredibly fragile choke point.
Okay, so before we can really dig into what a crisis would look like, we've got to set the scene. We need to understand the huge, and I mean huge, strategic importance of this one place, the Strait of Hormuz. Why does this little strip of water matter so much to literally everyone on the planet?
Just look at that number, 21 million. That's not for a week or a month. That's how many barrels of oil and other petroleum liquids squeezed through the Strait of Hormuz every single day in our pre-crisis scenario. It's just a mind-boggling amount of energy, all moving through one tiny spot on the map, day in and day out. And to put that 21 million barrels into perspective, think about all the oil that gets shipped around the world by sea. Well, over a quarter of it, more than 25%, goes through this one spot. So yeah, I'm not exaggerating when I say this is the single most important oil choke point on Earth. And if it closes, the whole system feels it, and I mean instantly. So what are we actually looking at on a map? Well, it's this narrow little waterway, right? It connects the Persian Gulf to the open ocean, and it's squeezed between Iran and Oman. But here's the part that's truly wild. At its tightest point, the actual lane those giant cankers have to navigate is just 2 miles wide. 2 miles. All that energy, our entire global economic stability, it's all forced through this tiny geographical funnel.
But, it's not just about the geography. That's only half the story. The really tricky part is that this physical choke point is sitting on top of some incredibly deep legal and military tensions. It's not just a narrow strait, it's a geopolitical powder keg just waiting for a spark. Now, you might be thinking, isn't there a rule for this? And yeah, there is. International law came up with something specifically to keep global trade flowing smoothly. It's called transit passage. The idea is pretty straightforward. All ships have a right to sail through these international straits, no questions asked. The countries on either side, they can't stop them. It's supposed to be non-negotiable. But here's where it gets complicated. See, there's a huge disagreement. On one side, you have the UN and most of the world saying, transit passage is a right, you can't suspend it. But on the other side, you have Iran. And here's the kicker. Iran never actually ratified that UN treaty. They argue a different, more restrictive rule applies called innocent passage, which, and this is the important part, can be suspended if they say it's for security reasons. That one single disagreement, it's the source of constant, never-ending friction. And believe me, it doesn't stop there. The entire strait falls within the territorial waters claimed by Iran and Oman. So Iran says, hey, these are our waters, we have the right to regulate warships passing through. But the US and its allies say no way, and they regularly sail their navies through to prove the point. So you have this constant back and forth, this simmering tension just bubbling right below the surface, waiting for something to go wrong. And in our scenario, that spark finally hits the powder. So with all that context in mind, let's jump right into the heart of our story. The date is February 28th, 2026. This is the day it happens, the day the world's energy artery is finally cut. And just look at how fast everything falls apart. It starts at 8:15 in the morning. Coordinated US-Israeli strikes hit targets inside Iran. Not even 3 hours later, at 11 a.m., the news breaks Iran's supreme leader was killed in the strikes. By 2:30 in the afternoon, Iran's response is unleashed, a massive wave of retaliatory missile strikes all across the Middle East. And then at 4 p.m., just 8 hours after this whole thing began, the announcement is made. And there it is, the one thing the global economy has dreaded for decades. It's no longer a threat, it's a reality. The announcement is simple, chilling, and direct. No ship is allowed to pass the Strait of Hormuz. It's unambiguous, and with those words, the world is thrown into a crisis it has never seen before. So, what happens the moment that announcement goes out? Well, with the strait officially closed, a massive shockwave just rips through the global energy markets. The result is, well, it's absolute chaos. This right here shows you the brutal, immediate impact. One minute, oil is trading at a pretty stable $70 a barrel. The next, projections show it skyrocketing to $150, maybe even more. And you have to understand, this isn't just about simple supply and demand anymore. This is pure panic. It's panic buying, it's wild speculation, and it's the sheer terror that the world's safety net for energy has just vanished. A price that high, that's not a market correction. That's the trigger for a devastating global recession. But, this isn't just a story about oil. Not at all. Look at this number, 20%. That's how much of the world's liquefied natural gas, or LNG, also just got taken off the market. And most of that gas comes from Qatar, which is now completely bottled up. This is the stuff that heats homes and powers factories in Asia and Europe. And here's the really scary part. Unlike oil, there are basically zero alternative routes to get that LNG to where it needs to go.
Yeah, a shock this big doesn't just stay in the energy sector. Think of it like dropping a massive boulder in a pond. The ripples spread out, and they are absolutely devastating. They hit every corner of the global economy, affecting everything from how we ship goods to the food you put on your table.
And these ripple effects happen fast. Suddenly, the cost to just rent a supertanker for one day explodes to over $200,000. Insurance companies start canceling war risk policies, or the premiums become so high nobody can afford them. And then you get this other threat, something called agflation. That's inflation for agriculture. Why? Because it turns out that about 35% of the world's key fertilizer ingredients also go through Hormuz. Cut that off, and you're not just looking at an energy crisis, you're looking at a global food crisis, too.
And if you want to know who gets hit the hardest, look east. The vast majority of all that energy flows to Asia. For the big economies there, this is a nightmare scenario. I mean, look at Japan and South Korea. They import over 80% of all their fossil fuels. So for them, the strait closing isn't just an economic headache. It's a genuine, existential threat to their entire national stability.
So the obvious question is, well, what about pipelines? Can't we just bypass the strait? And the answer, I'm afraid, is a hard no. There are a couple of bypass pipelines, sure, but together they can only handle less than a third of the oil that normally flows through the Gulf. It's not even close enough. There's no escape valve here. The world is utterly dependent on that single waterway. And all of this leads us to one final, unsettling question. For decades, our entire global economy has been built on a very fragile assumption that this one single point of failure would never actually fail, that it would always stay open. So what happens to all of us when that foundation finally cracks? What happens when the whole system breaks?